morning, everyone, and welcome to Ohio EPA's NPDES Construction Stormwater 102 presentation. My name is Helen Miller with the Division of Environmental and Financial Assistance here at Ohio EPA, and I will be moderating this morning's presentation with Ohio EPA's Wes Sluga from our Division of Surface Water. We also have Ohio EPA subject matter experts Jason Fife, Lynette Hablitzel, and Mike Joseph from our Division of Surface Water behind the scenes, helping to answer submitted questions. With that, I'm going to turn the mic over to Wes Sluga.
Hello, thank you very much, Helen. Thanks everybody for being here. This webinar is going to be a complimentary webinar to last year's 2021's National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System Construction Stormwater 101. This is the 102 version, and will provide another look at Ohio's construction stormwater program and the construction general permit. So today's topics are going to include the permit approval and application process. We're going to talk about permit coverage transfers and individual lot NOIs. We'll talk about the difference between state and local level stormwater regulations, a little bit about non-compliance and enforcement. We'll dive into some water quality volume and redevelopment calculations, and we'll wrap up with a tour of the new Ohio EPA website and some available technical resources. So if you've got questions, I encourage you to share them, and we'll make sure to answer them at the end of the session or reach out via email with a response. And as we go through, if there are acronyms that you aren't familiar with, please reference the acronym list, the cheat sheet included in the handouts. So let's start with our first poll. Did you attend last year's NPDES Construction Stormwater 101 presentation? Please select 1. Yes, I attended live. Yes, I watched the recording. No, but I want to. Where can I find it? And no, it didn't interest me. Great. So it looks like we have more than half of us, 54% said no, but I want to. Where can I find it? Well, that's a great question. So last year's webinar was posted online to the Ohio EPA's YouTube page. So if you head on to YouTube and search the Ohio EPA, you'll be able to find NPDES Construction Stormwater 101 will be one of the shared videos on that page, and you can check it out. But we do have some returning guests, so that's great. All right, so let's get into it. Now, the next few slides that I'm going to cover here are going to give a general overview of navigating to streams and starting a new notice of intent application, a new NOI. So in order to get to streams, you're going to need to start at the OHID page. And that OHID page is an easy way to access a variety of state programs and services from a single place with a single user account. So once you get there, you're going to find the Ohio EPA e-Business Center app, and it's going to take you to a list of applications there on the left that I've got. Streams is the 6th link down in the list. You can see it highlighted in green there. But also on that page towards the top is a quick way to check your PIN in case you forgot it. So under the My Account dropdown, you can select PIN Management and then click View PIN to refresh your memory. Now, even experts that are using streams can always use some assistance from time to time. So at the bottom of the slide, I've included the link to the Electronic Business Services webpage. And that's where you're going to find detailed guidance that will walk you step by step through the many common actions in streams, such as getting your PIN in the first place, filling out an NOI application, or even delegating an NOI to another party. Now, I'm not going to go into that level of detail here today, but I do want you to know that it is available. So once you get into streams and you want to create a new NOI, you're going to click Create New Permit Application at the top. And that's going to bring you to this page where you can select the type of permit application that you want. So for construction projects, you'd select construction stormwater from the dropdown. Next, you're going to fill in the facility location information there and check that it is accurate. When you're ready, you can move over and click the blue Create New Permit Application button. So as you, or perhaps even before you fill out your NOI, it's probably a good idea to understand the process your permit is going to undergo to get approved once you've submitted it. So first, the permit allows up to 21 days to approve the NOI, or up to 45 days if your project is within the Big Darby Creek or Olentangy River watersheds. Now, for most projects, that 21 days might seem like a long time, but it can be even longer if permitting staff find that there are some serious deficiencies in your application. That 21-day window is to allow for a reasonable amount of time to check that your application is complete, it's accurate, it was submitted correctly by the correct person, and it was paid for. So, but usually if you followed the stream's guidance and you've done things properly the first time, approval will happen much more quickly than those 21 days. But as I mentioned, sometimes it can take a while to approve an NOI application. And when I talked to our permitting staff, they said the most common question they receive is, why hasn't my application been approved yet? And there are a couple common answers. The first of which is that your project might be pending an individual 401 water quality certification if there's a wetland or a stream on site. And if that applies to you, you're going to want to check with our 401 program to see the status of that. Now, another common reason might be that payment hasn't been received yet. So if you decided to send your payment in via snail mail instead of paying electronically, it's going to take a little bit longer. And the third common one is that if your project falls within those portions of the special watersheds I mentioned, because that means your project's probably undergoing an extensive review of the stormwater pollution prevention plan by stormwater staff like me. And so if you're a developer or an owner operator for one of these Darby Olentangy projects, you're going to want to check with your engineering consultant to get an update on the status of the SWIP review and what comments were supplied by the reviewers that need to be addressed before that approval can occur. So in some cases, your application is going to be marked incomplete. And that means that something is wrong and it needs to be fixed before you can resubmit it. And if this happens, you'll get a notification via an email that tells you exactly what's wrong. Most commonly, it's one of three mistakes. First off, it's when the facility and the applicant addresses are identical. The facility address is where the development is going to be, while the applicant mailing address is where the owner or developer lives or works. At the bottom of the slide, I included a screen clip from the actual NOI application. And for new construction projects, the facility address is rarely also going to be the applicant address unless you're expanding on an existing facility. So don't get antsy and click that blue copy button unless you're absolutely sure that those two should be the same. Now, a next common mistake might be that the company contact doesn't jive with the company name that was provided. That company contact needs to be an employee of the company named, not the consultant who is preparing the application for the developer. And the third mistake is often location inconsistencies. You need to make sure that the latitude and longitude, the facility address, and the attached NOI location map are all corresponding to the same facility location. So to get into specific types of NOIs, and one that we get a lot of questions on is the individual lot NOI. And that's used when ownership is going to change for lots that are part of a larger development during the construction process. And they're used to ensure that every part of that development is covered during the entire construction process. So the Ohio EPA requires that once a lot is sold, an individual lot NOI should be submitted at least 7 days prior to that transfer of ownership. With that transfer in ownership, the portion of the SWIP and the water quality controls and BMP responsibilities are going to transfer as well. So therefore, it's really important that those responsibilities are communicated clearly to the new owner and passed on quickly as possible to avoid any misunderstandings. So let's take a look at an example here of a subdivision of when to apply for or transfer coverage depending on who you are. So if you're the developer, but you're not going to be building any of the homes, you're going to need to obtain general permit coverage to start construction. And you're going to want to hold on to it until one of two things. The first is that every single lot has applied for and gotten an individual lot NOI approved. That means their coverage has been transferred to them. However, the caveat to that is that if you have put in centralized controls that serve multiple different lots, say like a sediment basin, you're going to need to keep your coverage because you're responsible for those centralized controls during the entire active construction sequence. Now, if you're the developer and you're going to be the home builder, from the state's perspective, you don't really need to use an individual lot NOI because you're the responsible party for the entire construction process. You can just continue to keep your general permit coverage. But if you're the home builder or the home owner and you're not the developer, you're of course going to need to apply for an individual lot NOI. That's the whole reason they exist. So once you finish your construction and you stabilize your lot, you can terminate your individual lot coverage. But remember, be sure not to accidentally terminate the whole development's general permit coverage. Just terminate your own individual lot. Now, I will say that a note for developments in MS4 areas, or municipal separate storm sewer system areas, some MS4s are going to have ordinances that require individual lot NOIs to be submitted regardless of the situation. So if you're in that middle bullet as a developer and the home builder, and you think you might be in an MS4, you're going to want to check with them to see if that applies to your project. So now let's look at what this might look like in streams, right? So if you're the home builder and you need to apply for an individual lot NOI, you're going to click at the top, Add Facility/Permit. Then you're going to need to enter the whole development's general permit number, which is something you're going to get from the developer or their consultants. That's going to locate the general permit for the whole development. And then you can click the blue Actions dropdown there on the left in the rightmost column. You can click Create Lot Permit Application. I've got it highlighted in green. And you can fill out your individual lot NOI. And once it's approved, you know that permit coverage has been transferred to you for that lot. So our next topic is state versus stormwater regulations. And at its most basic, the Ohio EPA controls and issues all of our state level stormwater regs. And we tend to focus on water quality. And that means we issue regulations through our construction general permit conditions that prioritize the detention of and treatment of smaller, more frequent storms through the use of active and post-construction BMPs. The state doesn't have any regulatory authority over things like zoning, flood control, or drainage issues. We have to defer to local government to regulate those things. And for stormwater, that means that the city, the county, or the township is going to have a say in how you manage large storm detention requirements, not the state. So these large storm detention requirements are commonly referred to as flood control or peak flow control, and they've been regulated at the local level for much longer than the Ohio EPA has been regulating water quality. Now, a note on drainage issues in particular. The state does receive a lot of complaints about drainage issues, but we have to defer judgment to the local government or the civil action process because they're governed by Ohio drainage law, and the Ohio EPA doesn't really have any authority in those situations. But there are times that the state and local stormwater regulations can overlap, and that largely occurs within MS4s. And MS4s briefly are these urbanized areas that have their own storm sewer systems and must have a central program to manage their stormwater, and they have to follow their own state stormwater general permit. And that general permit requires that these municipalities have their own requirements that kind of mirror our state CGP. But it does allow them to enact stricter and additional requirements beyond the state permit. So some common examples that may only occur at the MS4 level would be to, say, require permit coverage for sites that are smaller than an acre. That's sometimes common. Some MS4s require that you include riparian setbacks or mitigate if you develop within those setbacks. And then some even require home builders to always get that individual lot coverage, even if they're the developer too, as I mentioned before. And another common one is that they might ask you to apply for an additional permit, a local permit, like a sediment and erosion control permit. But it's important to note that if you obtain a local permit, it is not going to exempt you from needing to obtain the state CGP and getting coverage. So our next topic is non-compliance and enforcement. And the first thing I want to say there is that the agency's purpose of addressing non-compliance is to ensure a level playing field for all the permittees that are involved, because if somebody isn't following the rules, they're going to have an advantage over everyone else, and that isn't fair. So when a facility is out of compliance, our goal as an agency is to return them to compliance as quickly and easily as possible. Nobody wants to put a facility through the enforcement process unless it is absolutely necessary. Now, the options the agency can use to address noncompliance usually fall into two categories, but are part of the same larger toolbox. And what I mean by toolbox is that we can use any tool at any point. It doesn't necessarily have to be a linear progression as listed here from top to bottom. But we'll start that way. And the simple tools we'll start with is the inspection letter. And that's something that an inspector provides after a site visit. And it usually contains guidance on how to correct any of the smaller issues that they may have found on site. But say those issues aren't corrected or they're pretty significant, a notice of violation, an NOV, may be issued. And that's a formal letter that details all of the non-compliance issues and then requested actions that need to be taken to address them. So below that are the enforcement actions, and these are the heavier duty tools, like the chief's warning letter. And that's a very formal, direct letter from the chief of the Division of Surface Water, but it doesn't contain any financial penalty. Another tool is the director's final findings and orders. That comes from the director's office, and they can be unilateral, which means there's no financial penalty, or consensual, which will include a financial penalty. But it requires that the respondent sign an agreement of settlement. And lastly, we can always refer the case to the Attorney General's office, in which the non-compliance issues are going to be addressed via the legal system. So let's get into some more detail on the NOV. Here we go. Every NOV is going to contain a definition of the violation that was found on site, and it's going to cite the Ohio Revised or Administrative Code or the general permit that was violated. So inspection findings are going to be detailed here to share the description of the issue, and then the agency will also specify requested actions that are needed to rectify the issue or issues that are found. So included in these requested actions will be the timeline the agency expects to hear back from the respondent. And this response needs to be written, and it should state what has already been done or what will be done to correct the violation, including the date and time of when those things were or will be done. And then the agency is going to respond with a decision on whether those actions are satisfactory, and then it'll request an update so that the respondent can provide some evidence of their completion. Sometimes the evidence can be as simple as pictures, just sent in via email, while other times an inspector is going to go out and check for themselves on site. But let's say everything checks out, the issue's been resolved, a resolution of violation will be issued, an ROV. And this document is like a much more pleasant version of the NOV. It kind of looks the same, but it includes the actions that were taken to resolve the violation and move the facility back into compliance. So let's take a moment to walk through an example of perhaps what would lead up to the issuance of an NOV. So first, let's say that a stormwater district inspector requests to see a facility SWIP via an email. And after 10 days, they still haven't heard anything back. Then they're going to directly reach out via phone call or an on-site visit to see if they can get that SWIP. And if still no SWIP is produced, they're going to issue an NOV, and that's going to be sent to the owner, the co-permittees, the company and facility contacts, as well as the MS4 contact if that applies for the site. And then depending on the response, any tool from the toolbox could be used to return the facility to compliance, or if a SWIP is produced, an ROV would be issued. So as I mentioned before, the tools that are considered to be enforcement are stricter ways to return a facility to compliance. And when enforcement gets used, the enforcement program is going to step in, and they're going to consider all the violations a facility has ever committed when deciding which tool they want to use. Now, some other important notes on enforcement. The financial penalties that some of those enforcement actions include are not a source of income generation for standard agency operations. Also, when you violate permit requirements, you're breaking state pollution prevention law. And the Ohio EPA can act using the tools we just discussed, but that doesn't protect you from further actions from third parties, such as civil lawsuits. And lastly, in the state versus local section, I talked about how the MS4 programs can have more stringent requirements than the state CGP. And that means they can also take their own separate enforcement actions against non-compliance that they find as well. All right, so let's get to our next poll. And this poll question is, what kind of organization do you represent in your work with stormwater, if you do any work with stormwater? Do you work with a township or city government? Are you part of county government? Are you part of state government? Do you work for a public organization? Or perhaps you work for a private business? So let us know so we get an idea of where all of you work and how you interact with the stormwater world. All right. Looks like we've got a pretty healthy mix, wouldn't you say, Helen? We've got our biggest category is private business. That probably makes sense for the safety conference that we're presenting at today. But we do have a good number from the local government level, township and cities, as well as county governments, a couple even from the state government, which is great. So if you work with stormwater, perhaps from this presentation, you can take away, well, if your facility maybe is expanding or putting in a new facility, this is pretty helpful information. And maybe if you work at the local level, you might be reviewers, or maybe you're doing projects within your local municipality. So it's a good idea to have a pretty good grip of this construction stormwater process. And to dive back in. All right. With this next section, we're going to start talking about a much more technical topic, something that I deal with almost every day. And that has to do with water quality volume calculations, or WQV calculations. So back a while ago, I mentioned in the state versus local section that the state regulates stormwater at the small storm scale. And this is the system that I was referring to. WQV is a volume of water that must be captured and treated by an approved best management practice, BMP, during the post-construction operation of a facility. And this calculation is a function of a set precipitation value, 0.9 inches, you can see there, a volumetric runoff coefficient, and that's calculated by the impervious fraction, and the drainage area. So first, that runoff coefficient, that R sub V, is equal to 0.05 plus 0.9 times I, where I is simply the impervious area divided by total area. Now, the state considers that impervious areas are any surface that sheds precipitation and has minimal to no infiltration. And that's your obvious surfaces like pavement and buildings, but also some less obvious surfaces such as gravel, most athletic fields, like turf athletic fields, as well as any water bodies or ponds. Then second part of that is the drainage area. And you can see that it's split into two categories there. We've got disturbed area and contributing drainage area. And that's a really important distinction that I'm going to dive into a little bit later. When you're calculating a site or facility's water quality volume, you want to use its disturbed area. But when you're calculating the water quality volume provided by a BMP, you'll use the contributing to that specific BMP. Now, hang on, that might not make a lot of sense just talking about it, but let's get into some examples that are going to help you see what I mean. So let's take a look at an example development. We've got a 2.25 acre parcel here, and every square inch of it is going to be disturbed by construction activities. And that's going to be turned into a commercial lot. And it's got some parking and a building and some grass areas around the outside. So we know that that impervious area of the site will be 1.35 acres. Now, so if we imagine that this development is new, there wasn't anything existing there that needs to be torn down, we're going to jump right in using our water quality volume equation. And so we start by finding our runoff coefficient, our R sub V, and we can see that our impervious fraction is 60%. There, our I equals 60%. And the R sub V is 0.59. So it's similar, but it's not the same. And then we plug in the disturbed area of 2.25 acres, and we can add that precipitation value in to get a required water quality volume for the site of 4,337 cubic feet. So we now know that the site needs to provide 4,337 cubic feet of water quality volume through any post-construction BMPs that they may use. But I mentioned before that each BMP must be designed to treat 100% of the water quality volume for its own contributing drainage area. So imagine we use grading and the storm sewer system on this facility to direct the entire site's drainage to a single post-construction BMP. And therefore, the disturbed area and the contributing drainage area are the same. They're both 2.25 acres. We know that the R sub V is going to be the same for both. And therefore, we know that water quality volume of the BMP design is equal to the water quality volume required by the site, both 4,337 cubic feet. Okay, so let's step this example up a little bit to highlight the distinction between BMP design and required water quality volume. So let's say adjacent to the property is 3/4 of an acre of woodlands, and it's going to drain onto this site. And so unless that drainage gets diverted, it's going to contribute some additional area to our BMP, and that needs to be accounted for. We know the water quality volume required by the site, it stays the same. The disturbed area hasn't changed. It's still 4,337 cubic feet. But we can see that the total drainage area to the BMP has increased now up to 3 acres. And that kind of changes our impervious fraction, right? It goes from 60% down to 45%, and our R sub V is going to drop down from 0.59 to 0.455. So we plug in that contributing drainage area, and we can see that our water quality volume needed for the BMP design is now 4,460 cubic feet. It's larger than what the site requires. But as long as the BMP or the BMPs have provided the same or more water quality volume than what the site requires, you're good to go. And you need to make sure that that BMP is sized correctly using its own drainage area. The key takeaway there is that you can't shrink the water quality volume for the BMP to match the water quality volume required by the site. So hopefully you can see why that distinction really matters. Now, another common complication is that maybe the site has multiple drainage areas. Now, each drainage area is going to have its own BMP and calculate its own water quality volume for its BMP design. So let's say drainage area 1 to the north is 1.5 acres in size, and the way it's split, it's 68% impervious. While the second drainage area, it's only 0.75 acres, and it's only 44% impervious. And you can see how those R sub Vs are different for each drainage area and different from the overall disturbed area from before of 0.59. And so when we do our water quality volume calculations, we can see that for drainage area 1, that BMP needs 3,244 cubic feet, and drainage areas 2 BMP needs 1,093 cubic feet. And because the way this example worked, they perfectly sum back together to be 4,337 cubic feet, and they match the water quality volume required for the site based on its drainage area, or its disturbed area, excuse me. Now, the second part of this example is to see how these water quality volume calculations change when the construction is occurring on a previously developed area. And that's something that we call redevelopment. So this means that the existing site has some impervious area that is going to be demolished, and new construction is going to add new impervious area to take its place. So a redevelopment project really has 2 options to meet the water quality requirements from the state CGP. And first and simplest, if you can design or develop projects so that you reduce impervious surface such that that R sub V for the site decreases by 20% or more, then you don't even need to provide any water quality volume. So that's pretty tempting. But if that isn't possible, then you're going to need to use equation 3 from the construction general permit, and that's used to calculate this water quality volume required for the site. And you might look at it and say, well, it looks kind of similar to the original water quality volume calculation. You still got precipitation, area disturbed, you got some R sub Vs in there, but instead of just using the final R sub V, it provides this credit for redeveloping land, and it uses both the pre-RV1 and the post-RV2 runoff coefficients. So let's work through some examples to kind of see how this equation gets used in practice. So imagine for option 1, we've got a site that's 77% impervious. It's largely a great big concrete pad right now. And it's going to be redeveloped. There's going to be a building that gets built, and it reduces the overall site impervious down to 60%. When we calculate our runoff coefficient for pre and post development, you'll see that there's a 21% decrease. And because that's larger than 20%, we know that no post-construction BMP is needed to provide water quality volume for this project. Now, with option 2, perhaps that R sub V decrease, it doesn't quite reach 20%. So we know that a BMP is going to be required here. So in this example, we've got an existing site that's 66% impervious. It's got a building and some parking lot, and we've got a different building layout proposed. And that's only 60% impervious. So we do get a decrease, but it's only 8.4%. And using the existing and proposed R sub Vs, we'll plug them into equation 3. And again, assuming that our drainage area is constant at 2.25 acres, we can get a required water quality volume of 550 cubic feet. And you can see that's a lot less than what it was when we did new development a little bit ago. But of course, remember, water quality volume required for the site isn't the same as water quality volume for BMP design. It must be designed to treat all the water quality volume for its contributing drainage area. Therefore, you can design and place a BMP to capture a portion of the site's drainage area if you restrict it somehow. And you can meet the site required water quality volume while still adhering to that water quality volume rule for a BMP. And in this case, we use our normal water quality volume equation backwards. And this time we'll solve for area instead of solving for WQV. And we use that 550 cubic feet from our previous slide. And we know that a BMP needs to capture at least 0.18 acres of this development site. Now, the permit requires that the area the BMP captures should be the area with the highest expected pollutant load. And the perfect example of that is like your surface pavement or like a high traffic parking area. We don't want you capturing the rooftop or pervious areas that are going to have a relatively lower pollutant load. If you only got to capture a little bit, we want you to capture the worst possible part of the site. So now another complication for these redevelopment problems is when R sub V increases, not decreases. But don't worry, equation 3 is more than robust enough to handle this kind of a situation, and it will still produce a required water quality volume for the site, even when we've got redevelopment that is expanding. So we can see how the site goes from 43% impervious up to 60% impervious. So we got a pretty big increase there, a 35% increase in R sub V. But we can still find water quality volume required to be 1,768 cubic feet, which we know still is less than those new development situations we talked about before. So again, like before, the water quality volume required by the site, that 1,768 cubic feet, is not the same as the BMP's water quality volume, as that's dependent upon its drainage area. So if we work backwards again through the water quality volume equation, we find that minimum drainage area for this BMP to be 0.57 acres. So you can see here in yellow, we've got it, well, what if we routed the storm sewer such that we could capture 0.57 acres of parking lot? Again, I want to remind and clarify that if some different design decisions had been made, and the entire storm sewer system was routed to a single BMP, you'd need to provide water quality volume in that BMP for its entire drainage area, not just the 1,768 cubic feet from the water quality volume we calculated from equation 3 before. And hey, if all these calculations that I'm running through pretty quickly seem to be overwhelming, maybe you haven't done them before, that's okay. We do have tools that can help you through them, and I'm going to get into that here in the next couple slides. So, but before I get into those resources, I want you to be able to figure out where to find them first. So we'll start with our new website. And if you used our website here in the last few months, and you may have noticed that it got a pretty big upgrade. Our new website launched in early December of 2021 as part of the new Innovate Ohio platform to provide a nice consistent website format across all state agencies. So once you know how to navigate through one, you'll know how to navigate through all of them. Some other perks that this new website has is that it's mobile friendly. It's a lot faster than the old one, but things do look a little different. Some navigation has changed. If you have old links on documents, they're probably not going to work anymore. So you're going to need to go back into the new website and update them. So let's start with a quick tour, and we'll start with the homepage. So on the top of every page, including that home page, there's going to be a green band, and that directs you to our built-in site tour guide. So say you want a deeper dive, or maybe this is the first time you've ever used the site, I strongly encourage you to navigate here and click on that Learn More button at the top and read through the Welcome to our new website page. It's going to explain what has changed, how to utilize our new features, as well as directions for overall website navigation. So some new features that I personally want to highlight include the breadcrumb trail on the top left, and that's going to show you where every page that you're on, you can see where it's filed so you can get back there. Perhaps my favorite is the improved search function. This is great. The old website had a slow, it was kind of clunky and inaccurate search function. Didn't always really take you where you wanted to go, but this new search is lightning quick, and it's much better at reading keywords and finding the relevant pages and documents that you're probably looking for. So considering I just hyped up the search function, let's see if it can get us to the stormwater page. So that's what we're talking about today. So I pulled this screen clip from when I used the search function. I typed in stormwater program into the search bar after I clicked the little magnifying glass icon. And you can see that the search found more than 500 relevant items to the query, but highlighted in green, the stormwater program page comes up second in the list. So I've got it right there. Great, we know it works. And the only thing above that it picked first was the Rainwater and Land Development Manual, which is an awesome resource that I'm going to talk about a little bit later. So maybe you just want to do the work yourself, or you don't want to use the search function, whatever it may be. Now, here's another way to get to that stormwater page. So if you start from our main Ohio EPA homepage that I started with earlier, you're going to want to scroll down about halfway down that page, and you'll see the R Divisions scroll bar up there. If you click the right arrow twice, the surface water box there is going to pop up all the way on the right. When you click it, it's going to take you to the Division of Surface Water Program page. And on the left-hand side of your screen now, you'll see in the column there, you can click Programs. And when you scroll down a little bit, you'll get to the Permits Programs bullet. And if you look in there, you'll see a blue stormwater link. And that's going to take you to the stormwater page. As you can see, it isn't quite as easy as the search function, but you're free to take whichever path you fancy. So once we get to our stormwater page, this is where we wanted to be. Other than a slight aesthetic upgrade, if you've been here before, the page is going to function just like it always has. We've got our recent relevant topics, say like general permit renewal information and any links with that. They're going to be listed at the top of the page. You scroll down, the meat of the site really falls in these topic tabs and their associated drop downs. Now, construction activities is obviously the focus for today. So if we click that tab there in white, you're going to see all the different drop downs. So you got program background, a drop down to get to our current construction general permit. And of course, my favorite is the technical assistance and permit compliance materials. And that's where you're going to find all of our guidance documents, our design manuals, and any other reference resources that you could really ever want. So you can also get to the construction general permit itself via the construction activities tab, like I said, but also the first tab there, forms and general permits tab, will get you there as well. You click that stormwater general permits drop down, and the first bullet right away is going to take you to the construction general permit page. Once you get onto the page, there at the bottom, you can see you can find a copy of the permit itself. That's the first bullet. You've got a fact sheet that covers a broad look at what this permit, this edition of the permit contains, but as well as a response to comments received document from when this permit was updated back in 2018. So if you've got questions about the permit, it might be a good idea to look and see if your question was already asked by somebody else and answered by the agency within that document. All right. So I mentioned before that my favorite part of that site is that stormwater technical assistance dropdown. So if we head back to the stormwater page and we click that dropdown, once you're on it, you could see why it's my favorite. At the top, we've got our design manuals, and that's like the Rainwater and Land Development Manual, and that includes all of our approved stormwater BMP design standards and guidance. Up there, we've also got ODOT's Location and Design Manual, and that has BMPs that are specific to publicly owned roadway projects. Below that, we've got some question and answer documents that contain a collection of commonly asked questions that are kind of arranged by topic there, such as water quality volume, you can see, or previously developed areas. That's another one there. And both of those topics I kind of covered today. So, but if you're interested and you want to learn more, you can always go here, click them, and there's a whole repository of more information to help you better understand how they work. The third section down there is for tools and spreadsheets. These include calculators and compliance spreadsheets that we've specifically built to help check engineer consultants' work. So for example, that water quality volume calculator can automatically compute all of those site required water quality volume calcs that we did earlier, both for new development and redevelopment. So all that stuff that we did earlier can be done in a snap just by using that calculator. The BMP compliance worksheets also can help with that. They help to calculate the water quality volume of the BMP design. So together, those two calculators can work together really well to check to make sure that everything is being done correctly on your site. Now, lastly, under forms and checklists, we've got the SWIP checklist that breaks the entire permit into neat separate steps and are super helpful for reviewers or designers to check that their SWIP or the SWIP that they're reviewing contains everything that needs to per the CGP. But the technical resources don't end there either. If you scroll down a little further, you're going to see additional compliance materials. I'll point out a few of the most helpful documents, starting with the routine maintenance exclusion document. This explains in detail which routine maintenance activities are exempt from permit coverage, something that you'd want to know if you're planning on doing things like short spurts of roads resurfacing or guardrail replacement, for example. Next are two post-construction guidance documents for renewable energy developments, and they outline how to apply our post-construction controls to solar panel array or wind turbine projects. And lastly, we've got the Chagrin River Watershed Partners have put together an excellent operation and maintenance manual designed for owners and operators that does a great job of explaining stormwater BMP maintenance so that everyone can understand. And it's even got an example template that you can use to create your own O&M plan. Now, the RLD manual, I kind of mentioned it before, it contains all of our technical standards and specs for stormwater BMPs. The manual is currently undergoing some revisions, and new chapters are going to be integrated into the manual until the entire thing is updated with a new look and the most current specs. So when you navigate to this page, draft chapters are going to appear at the top, like in this screenshot, so you can kind of check them over and offer any feedback you might have before they get officially posted. Now, to get into the chapters themselves, you'll kind of scroll down to see the tabs. Each tab contains the 8 chapters and the appendices as well in drop downs. The chapter titles are pretty self-explanatory, but if you wanted some guidance on wet extended detention basins, you could click on chapter 2 and then open up 2.6 wet extended detention basin to get a copy of that section of the manual. There's also some other helpful tabs like technical memos that have specific updates and clarifications to BMP design. So this is another great spot to look and see if we already have the answer to any questions you might have that have been posted on the website already. We got a lot of great guidance, so I strongly encourage you to come and check it out for yourself. So I really appreciate your attention. Here's a nice little summary slide to see who to contact in our program, depending on the question you might have. We've got technical assistant staff like me, permitting staff, administrative staff, district staff. They're all ready to answer any question you might have. And you can always send us an email. Everybody has an email in the form firstname.lastname@epa.ohio.gov. So feel free to reach out. And that brings us to our last poll. And what I'd like to know this time is, would you be interested in attending another stormwater webinar next year? I mean, we've got some options. Our first is yes, we'd really like an NPDES Construction Stormwater 103 to dive into further details of the construction general permit program. Yes, but we want you to focus on a specific construction stormwater BMP or on the SWIP itself. Or perhaps you want us to do one for industrial stormwater or for MS4s. And then lastly, no, I don't really want to attend a stormwater webinar again. All right. More than half of us would love another an example. Perhaps maybe this might be the same group that didn't get to attend our 101 presentation. So I'd encourage you to check that out and see if some of that information you're interested in might be there. Got a good mix that would like us to cover some specific topics, maybe industrial or MS4 or BMPs. And luckily, only a couple of us never want to attend this again. So I'm sorry we didn't reach you today. All right. So do we have a little bit of time for questions, Helen?
Yes, I think we can get to a couple very short questions before we wrap up. Okay. The first question is, how much time before the start of construction can I apply for a permit?
Oh, great. So a good question. I did cover that a little bit today. Remember that for normal permit coverage, you need to submit an NOI at least 21 days before you anticipate construction to start. And if you're in the Olentangy or Big Darby Creek, you're going to want to do that 45 days beforehand. But if you can get everything in correctly, it probably is going to happen before 21 days.
Okay, our last question that we have time for today. As a consultant, can I submit a permit application for my client?
That's another good common question. No, you can fill out the NOI, you can put in all the information for your client, but you can't be the one to actually hit submit. You need to delegate that submittal back to the client for them to complete and hit submit.
Okay, well, we're running close to the clock here. So thank you, Wes, for the great presentation. Thank you, Jason, Lynette, and Mike for answering questions that were submitted. Thank you to our behind the scenes team that keeps our webinars running smoothly. Thanks to everyone for attending today's webinar. We'd also like to bring your attention to our Encouraging Environmental Excellence Award Program, which recognizes entities for exceptional achievements in environmental stewardship. Is your organization going beyond to reduce your environmental impact? Examples include lighting retrofits, reducing water energy usage, recycling efforts, process improvement. Many of us have children in school. Is your K-12 student implementing student-led sustainable activities at their school? Examples include encouraging recycling, water bottle refilling stations, anti-idling policies, composting. This program has different levels of recognition for organizations, communities, and schools. Please go to our website on the slide to learn more about this program. And please join us for our next webinar sessions. Today, as part of BWC's Ohio Safety Congress, we have 3 more sessions: Decoding RCRA from 10 to 11, Ohio EPA air pollution permit requirements from 1 to 2, and what to expect during an EPA inspection from 3 to 4. On April 5th, please join us for a webinar on our Water Resource Restoration Sponsorship Program. The WRRSP uses interest monies from our Water Pollution Control Loan Fund, loan sponsor projects, to fund preservation and restoration of aquatic habitat. If you missed past webinars or would like to register for upcoming webinars, check out our new agency event calendar at the link on the slide. You can register for upcoming DEFA webinars here. The events link is also on the web page footer at the bottom of every web page. You can also go to DEFA's web page to register for upcoming training, and you go to the link on the slide. On the DEFA web page, click on the word training on the left-hand menu column. Here you'll also find recordings of training you may have missed. You can also go to our agency YouTube channel to view recorded webinars, and we will post a recording of this webinar on our YouTube channel. I usually post within a week of the webinar, and we also post a PDF copy of the PowerPoint slides with the recording. To receive notifications of upcoming webinars, go to our Ohio EPA Customer Support Center, create an account, and go to the Subscribe to Updates option, and that link is on the slide. And the Customer Support Center link is also at the bottom footer of each web page. And with that, we will end today's webinar. Thank you again for joining us, and have a great day.